Hello, inmates, and welcome to the cellblock Scorch Week 10. This is Bones, and I'm recording as the winner of this week's Scorch. This week's prompt was given by Peishi, and it was, must include the line of dialogue, "You are a sandwich." To clarify, the words are all caps and separated by exclamation marks. Alright, so a few words about this Scorch before I get into it. You're going to recognize the characters here because this is a Maestroverse piece. That means that this is the same characters as my Week 4 Sunshine is a Bad Omen Scorch. This one takes place in their real universe, though, so it's not the same world as that one. Also, there is Russian in this piece. In case you were wondering, I do not speak Russian. I do not speak, read, or understand Russian in any capacity. This wasn't a problem when I wrote it, because no one in the Scorch can, so they just had to look at my Google Translate Russian and accept it as the truth. I did not have to attempt to pronounce it. Luckily for me, though, I do have a cousin who speaks Russian, and he's a fantastic person who I asked to record the words for me, so I'm going to be a terrible heathen and listen to his great pronunciation and do my gosh diddly darndest to replicate it. So, if I'm screwing up the Russian, then that's just how it's gonna be. I'm trying my best. Also, just so you know, we are POV a character who does not speak Russian, so none of the Russian is translated because he doesn't know what it means, but also because they can be pretty easily figured out through context clues or from other characters in-universe explaining what has been said. So, without further ado, this Scorch is called Adventures in Babysitting. I am Maestro, rising star of the underworld, daring bank robber extraordinaire, leader of a fearsome group of vagabonds. I do not babysit. The giant Russian Maestro was monologuing to blinked twice in utter incomprehension, then turned to the other man in the room in question. Maestro rolled his eyes spectacularly, also turning to the redhead. And you will tell him as much, Romulus, if you want to keep your job. Romulus looked at his boss contemplatively for a moment, and then shrugged, turning to the man still standing in the doorway with a bland expression. Da, on это сделает. Maestro, since he didn't speak Russian, technically couldn't have known that Romulus had once again completely botched a simple translation job out of sheer spite. However, since it was well on its way to becoming a running gag, and because Andre had just grinned like he had received good news, Maestro really wasn't surprised when the next day at 2:00 sharp, the hulking Russian dropped off his tiny niece. "Dядя Maestro!" the 10-year-old shrieked at a most ear-piercing pitch, flying into the room and solidly shouldering him in the stomach in her rush to give him a hug. Oh yes, she hadn't changed a bit since he'd seen her last. This was going to be oh so fun. Not just me, he replied, knowing full well the girl wouldn't understand, but refusing to do anything about it. Your Uncle Romulus is here too. As he had thought, the only word she got out of that was Romulus's name. But the gesture back into the kitchen area of the small apartment was enough to send the excitable girl squealing in that direction. Brat! Her voice trilled as she gave Romulus's stomach the same treatment, and he let her because Andre was still standing in the doorway, beaming like some sadistic hyena. Did she just call you brat? Maestro chuckled, waving Andre off without a word, since neither of them understood the other anyway. It means brother, and I'd rather that than uncle, old man, Romulus sneered, attempting to gently extract himself from the girl's surprisingly tight grip. I'm not even 30, you ungrateful. Aliona, don't you dare touch my knife block, I so swear. The little girl, hand hovering only a few centimeters above one of the hilts of the carving tools, regarded Maestro with an utterly guileless smile that made him more nervous than anything else she could have possibly done. This had been a mistake. Maestro had known from the beginning that the girl was devil's spawn wrapped in a pretty dress, but of course Romulus simply couldn't accept that. The only bit of peace Maestro took from this situation was that he had forced Romulus to be present for this. The stupid teen would suffer here with him. Not even an hour later, and Maestro was so very glad that his home was already a veritable dump with sparse furnishings, because, had it not been before, it would be now. Aliona was a menace to all things with half a semblance of order, which included the once nice suit Maestro was wearing, now covered in flour and spices from adventures in the kitchen. "Let's give her to Zachem and let her run wild," Romulus groaned, pressing a pillow into his face. It was unclear if he was trying to block out Aliona's yelling or if he was trying to smother himself. But either way, Maestro made no move to stop him. Great idea. If the idiot would ever get back from the store, I would. At that moment, the sound of the doorknob punctuated the loudness of the room, causing a sudden quiet as Aliona took interest. "Brat Zachem!" she shouted after a moment, and neither Maestro nor Romulus made any attempt to look up as the sound of grocery bags hitting the floor filled the apartment. "Bitty kiddo! Hi!" A hop, a skip, and a jump. A hop, a skip, and a jump. Zachem pranced about the room, flouncing around the sparse furniture as if in a flowery field. Behind him bounced the girl. "Preg skok, preg skok, preg skok," she chanted, copying the blonde man's actions to the best of her abilities. "They're children," Maestro stated, looking absolutely befuddled at the idea. It was still very strange to see Zachem acting in such a way. The clone had been getting more and more lifelike for the year he had existed, but of all the possible conclusions to that progression, Maestro had not expected this. And, by the pained look in Romulus's eyes, the 19-year-old delinquent agreed wholeheartedly. "One of them is," he frowned, looking mildly disturbed. "The other just seems like an idiot." Seeing the grin beginning to spread across Maestro's face, he quickly tried to cut his boss off. "Now, Romulus," Maestro smirked before he could, "you really shouldn't talk about Aliona that way. Someone might tell Andre." The little girl halted in her imitations at the sound of her uncle's name, turning and running over to the two men at the table with a huge grin, babbling out Russian words that made absolutely no sense to Maestro. He therefore ignored them, in favor of smiling tauntingly at his head minion. "That man may look like a bear, but he's smart enough to know that everything you say is a lie. Besides, he can't understand a word you say, Drosky Franzus. It'll be my words against your hand gestures." Aliona giggled, taking to chanting, "Drosky Franzus, Drosky Franzus," while prancing around the table. Maestro eyed the little girl in what Romulus would have thought to be contempt if he didn't know better, and looked to be gearing up to say something when Zachem jumped in, joining in the chant and dancing with Aliona. "My own minions," Maestro muttered, looking truly insulted despite not knowing what the phrase meant. The first, he was certain from his brief interactions with Andre, was some kind of mild insult that was unquestionably directed at him. In light of this, he decided to ignore what was happening around him and most of Romulus's previous dialogue. "I say nothing for his intelligence, but you are what you eat," he shrugged. "That must be why you're such a shrimp." "Oh yeah? Well, then you must be a sandwich." Maestro gave Romulus, who was wincing at his own terrible comeback, an utterly unimpressed stare. In the 4 years they had known each other, he'd clearly done an abysmal job at teaching the kid how to banter. "Wrong. Do you understand the extent to which—" "Sandwich?" Maestro halted mid-sentence, turning to Aliona with a sense of foreboding. The girl was looking at him with those darned puppy-dog eyes. "Что sandwich?" "Sandwich nothing," Maestro snapped, turning away resolutely. "You are what you eat," Zachem explained to her, but she clearly didn't understand. Both mental children, turned to Romulus with pleading eyes. Diesht, sto, diesht, Romulus responded, repeating what Zachem had said in Russian for once without changing anything. Try as he might to ignore them, he couldn't resist 2 sets of those ridiculous puppy dog eyes. Oi! Sandwich! She exclaimed, looking like the secrets of the world had been revealed to her. She beamed at Maestro, leveling a finger at him and exclaiming, Die Sandwich! What? Maestro asked, turning to his resident Russian translator, who was covering his mouth with his hand in an unsuccessful attempt to hide his amusement. She says that you're a sandwich. Maestro turned to the girl with the most insulted look they had ever seen on his face. It was one thing to be badly insulted by a legal adult, and quite another to be told the same thing by a child. I am not a sandwich. Aliona cocked her head in incomprehension. Je vais not sandwich. Aliona, despite the utter butchering of her language, seemed to pick up on what he was trying to say. Die ni sandwich? She asked, eyebrows drawing together and lower lip beginning to quiver. Maestro looked nearly speechless for a moment, but gathered himself quickly. Yes, vai ni sandwich. No sandwich, Aliona pouted, tears gathering in her eyes. Un sandwich, Romulus assured quickly, sending Maestro a swift glare. Maestro turned away resolutely. Yeah, he's totally a sandwich, Zachem laughed, nearly hysterically, flailing around in a failed attempt to calm the girl. Vai sandwich? Aliona asked timidly, pulling on Maestro's sleeve. No. Vai, ni, before he could get through the second word, which seemed to be about to send Aliona into a teary fit, Zachem and Romulus grabbed him by the shoulders and forced him to face the little nearly crying girl, glaring fiercely at him over her head. You are a sandwich! I am not, he cut himself off, I finally catching on the obviously distraught little girl. Fine. Yes, I'm a sandwich.
What's up, inmates? This is Paishi. I hope you're all having a great time and you enjoyed Bones' lovely Scorch. I am here with the probably longest judge comment to date. So I always reread the Scorches before I give a judge comment just so that everything's fresh in my mind. So I read Bones' that you just heard and Crickets, which will be on the Patreon. And I recall that it was a close match, but Bones read out, I think, because of familiarity with... No, actually, I think it was because it was funnier, and the prompt was intended to be something funny. And so Bones brought that level of comedy that I wanted, and that's why I picked it. Because I had familiarity, actually, with both universes, and I quite enjoyed them both. And I'm going to give you some context that is definitely unnecessary for this Scorch in particular, since most of you won't have seen Crickets. But I believe there is a Scorch coming up next week that will be kind of in that same zone, so why not provide the context now? Especially because I want to be the one to do it anyway, because it's all my fault. Okay, so, as you all know by now, me and Cricket and Bones, right? We were living together when we started the Scorch. And Bones introduced us to anime, right? We all started off with Fairy Tail. And then we all watched, I think second was Death Note, because Bones is a vindictive little gremlin who thrives on schadenfreude and making people suffer. So we all watched Death Note. And then I think the third one that we all watched together, well, Fairy Tail was ongoing. We would watch these like shorter ones in between arcs, I think. But the third one would have been Ouran High School Host Club. And if you are unfamiliar with anime, that is a reverse harem anime and kind of one of the poster children of that genre, right? And so a reverse harem, the concept is that you have a female protagonist right? It's reverse harem because the harem anime, right, would be with the male protagonist and a bunch of females that they're like, that are into him, and, you know, he has to pick between them. So the reverse harem is kind of that concept with a female protagonist, and then we've got a whole bunch of male characters who are varying stages of being in love with her. And they all have different personalities, and it's quite fun. It's not really a concept you see too much in Western media, right? So it was very new to me when I first watched Oron. I was delighted by it as a concept. And of course, one of the questions that naturally comes up when you're watching a show like that in a group is like, well, who would you pick? And for Oron, it was actually a twofold question: was whose table would you sit at, and who would you actually want to be with, right? These were separate questions for some of us. Anyway, I asked that question, right? And we all picked somebody in the Oron High School Host Club that we thought we would vibe with best, right? But then, now that I had opened that door, I started thinking about it in context of every anime that we watched. And it's been so many years now that I end up at least thinking about this with every piece of media that I consume, because I've corrupted myself so thoroughly. But it was just kind of a thing that we started doing with anime, was we would watch the anime together and we would be like, okay, but who, if I lived in this universe and I had a character here, which character would my character go for? And it was just this kind of, funny, creative thing that we did, right? And we started to keep track of it, and there started to be more of us doing it. And so we came up with kind of rules where, like, we couldn't pick the same person, and we couldn't pick somebody who already had a ship, and just varying little things like that. And some of us like to break these rules, and some of us like to steal people that we know that other people will like, and, it's just a fun, interactive little thing that we do. And it's actually called, we have a spreadsheet where we keep track of it that is called the virus list. And that is because this was referred to as something that I infected the people with, right? It's my virus. Just like anime is the thing that Bones infected us with, and me and Lost are responsible for getting the group into K-pop, and, varying things that we like to make fun of each other for. So anyway, Cricket's Scorch that was written for this prompt was written as a fan fiction for one of these anime that we had all watched, and it included some of our little self-insert OCs with their selected ships, right? And back in the day, we all used to put, I feel like, a lot more effort into actually making the OC and a storyline. I feel like I've gotten a lot more lax with that, especially as the years have gone by, where I'll just watch an anime and I'll be like, that one would be mine, and move on without, back in the day, we would come up with names and how they met and all kinds of stuff, which we don't really do as much anymore. Anyway, we're just, creative, funny people, so we do ridiculous things because we're crazy. But I actually wanted to go ahead and, since this is a very exposing thing for some of the members of this group, I wanted to go ahead and mention the people who are not on the virus list, who do not participate in playing this game with us, just so that their names can be cleared, so to speak. So the people who are not on this list are Safety Matches, and Grishmak, and Red. Everybody else has at least one person on this list. And I'll go ahead and expose the person who has the most, just because I think it's funny. And we all love to direct vicious mockery at each other. So the person who has the most has 113 viruses on this list, right? I said virus is the name of the list because I am the virus, but we have also just taken to calling all of the various random spouses on this list viruses. Anyway, the winner has 113 viruses on this list, and that is Bones. Of course, of course. Anyway, that's all I have to say for this judge comment. I had a great time reading both Scorches, and I hope you will enjoy both of them as well. Keep those fires burning.
Okay, some comments about the judge comments before I talk about my Scorch. Peishi explained about all the virus list, and that stuff will come into play on the podcast, but the first time is week 16, so it'll be a while. I also wrote that one, so look forward to our shame. It's very fun. Also, on the Patreon, you can sort by tags, right? So everything where some or all of the characters were inspired by members of Stellacore is going to be tagged Stellacore AU. So Cricket's from this week is going to be in there, mine from week 16 as well, and some of them are fanfiction, but a lot of them are also just original works that just use us as character models. And yeah, it's very fun. Also, I want to clarify that the reason I have the most virus people is because I have watched the most shows. I started several years before everyone else. And the reason that Peishi finds it so funny is that I am also Arrow Ace and probably the least invested in romance and relationships overall. But look, characters are rad, and I will be collecting the best ones. They will be mine. So yeah, that's my defense. Anyway, back to my Scorch. So this is Maestroverse, as I've said. It takes place before the main storyline in the book, so it's not really connected plot-wise. One thing that's mentioned, Maestro and Romulus are surprised by how Zachem is acting, specifically because he's a clone. The thing is that Zachem wasn't always his own person, I guess. Like, the first few successful clones, which... Actually, I'm going to explain the numbering currently first. So Maestro has numbered all of the Zachem clones. The one that is in the actual book is Zachem 568. So, like, there have been a lot of different Zachems. But the Zachems didn't start really working until almost 300. So, like, it's less than, you know, you think. The first 300 almost were like failed experiments. But after it started working, he would, you know, die doing dumb things because he didn't have any memories. He doesn't have any, like, you know, like, he's really easy to kill and bad things. It's very dark, actually. It's played for comedy because this is a comedy, but it is very, very unfortunate. Especially because the first few times what happened is that he still has all the memories, right? So what happens is he gets all the memories from the previous Zachems because that's how Maestro loads up the next Zachem, so that the next Zachem will actually learn and be able to not do the thing that killed the previous Zachem, except he was acting kind of like a robot. You know, like, the first few successful clones were basically just acting like robots. They, like, did whatever they were told, they didn't seem to have emotions, so they weren't being treated like people, but they have this whole thing, Code 308, in Maestro's lair, which means that someone in the lair has turned against them, basically. And this is because Zachem 308, so a couple of Zachems in, had all the memories from the previous Zachems that worked and remembered how they died. So Zachem 308 was like, all that happens is that these people kill me in stupid ways, and then I get brought back to life to work for them again. And he, like, rebelled. And then Maestro and Romulus were like, oh frick, this clone thing is, like, gaining sentience. That's weird. We better actually start treating this thing like a real person instead of like a robot, basically, as they had been doing before. So this, I don't know exactly how long this is after which number of clone this Zachem is, but this is a Zachem that's, like, pretty recently after Zachem 308, so he's, like, just learning how to actually be a person and just kind of growing into himself. So that's why Maestro and Romulus are like, what on earth is going on with our clone? Like, why is he acting like a child and jumping around with this kiddo? Because they weren't expecting it, you know? They don't know. But yeah, that's dark, but it's also really funny. Haha. The piece itself, I don't have much to say about it. Maestro found himself living in a primarily Russian-speaking apartment complex, and that's the reason this Russian dude is foisting his niece onto him for babysitting. Maestro doesn't learn Russian for the entire story, actually, and Andre does not learn English, and they simply hand gesture at each other and stare a lot, and both of them privately think it's too funny to fix, so they don't. Especially because Romulus speaks English and Russian, so if they need to say something, then they can call him up and make him translate for them. Oh, and the Russian, I'm not going to translate most of it since I think it's pretty clear in context, but the one thing I will explain is the insult. Romulus calls Maestro a stupid French person. Maestro speaks French, but he doesn't have a French accent like our main man Interdit from the last Scorch that had to do with this from week 4. And Romulus calls him this primarily because it's what Andre says whenever he's being salty about Maestro living in their Russian building and having the audacity to be bilingual in the wrong language. Also in this piece, the first time Maestro tries to deny being a sandwich, he says je, which is the French word for I, and a common bilingual problem that I personally have, which is ye old, I don't know what the word is in the language I need to say it in, but I can't say it in my first language because that's not right. And your brain goes, oh wait, don't worry fam, I got you bro. Here's that word in another language. But it's totally not the right language. So he just horribly mixes French and Russian and English as he's trying to deny being a sandwich. So yeah, there's not much other context to this. It's just a cute piece about a supervillain and his lackeys being bullied by a tiny girl. And I love that, and I hope you do too. The prompt I gave for the next week was hypothetically. Literally just the word hypothetically. I just feel like it has such comedic potential, especially when people tack it on the end of a horrible sentence. So what would you do if I painted your minifigs for your birthday surprise, but then found out that the paint was acidic and they melted? Hypothetically. That's what I think of immediately when I hear the word. Usually it's not actually a hypothetical, it's just a very real thing that was said or done, but the word hypothetically is thrown on the end for plausible deniability purposes. So, yeah, I prompted hypothetically for week 11 to see what my cohorts would do with it. Alright, before I sign off, we have a few announcements. From now on, the pieces that are exclusively on the Patreon will be referred to as Embers, while the ones featured on the podcast will be Scorches. Peishi proposed Embers because Embers are actually the hottest part of the fire, even though the open flames draw the most attention, so that's our bonus content for our lovely sparks. Speaking of bonus content, we're adding more nonsense to our Patreon for our Spark level supporters, which we have 2 of now. Yeah. But anyway, we're a bunch of sillies, and we make memes and jokes, and so we've decided to just throw those up for people as bonus content as well. Memes encapsulating the stories we tell, or related to the Scorches, whatever the creator desires. We're also adding a collection on Patreon called AI-Generated Shenanigans, in which we're going to put AI-generated art that were generated with prompts such as a person named, insert each of our Scorch names here. To clarify, this is just a silly little thing. We're not claiming to have made the art, to own the art, or to really be represented by the art. If we ever get around to making merch, nothing AI-generated will be used. It will either be in-house or officially commissioned from an artist who will then be credited for it. But we think seeing what an AI thinks a person named Grishmak looks like is hilarious, so we figured we'd put them up for your amusement as well. So feel free to check those out. The first series is A Person Named, and it's free for everyone to see. Later ones will probably just be available for Spark level supporters, but hopefully you enjoy them. Thank you all, and keep your fires burning. The Cellblock Scorch is a production of Stellacore, an independent group of nerds sharing their obsessions with the world. We can be reached at thestellacore@gmail.com, through comments on your podcast platform of choice, our Instagram, Stella_core, and at our YouTube, also called Stellacore. Feel free to check out our other productions on our YouTube channel, or our cosplays on Instagram. If you would like to support our creative endeavors, you can give a one-time tip to the Ko-Fi of the writer of your favorite Scorches, or check out our Patreon, linked in the show notes. There, you can access the winning Scorches and episode transcripts for free. or sign up for Spark level support for $5 a month to gain access to all of the Scorch submissions.